All right, so let's take a look at some of our Alaska news for Friday, November 18th, 2016. Before we get into the news, weather-wise, we're looking at partly cloudy skies today with a high around 8 above. Tonight, we'll see a low around -10, and tomorrow, mostly clear with a high for our Saturday right around 1 above 0. A state senator who challenged Governor Walker's cut to the Alaska Permanent Fund dividend this year plans to appeal a judge's decision that found that Walker acted within his authority. Senator Bill Wachowski of Anchorage said it was always expected that the case would be decided by the Alaska Supreme Court. A senator and 2 other former legislators brought the case, arguing that the Permanent Fund Corporation was obligated by law to make available nearly $1.4 billion from the fund's earning reserve for dividends, in spite of the veto reducing that amount. Wachowski said he didn't think the governor has that power. But following intense questioning of the case during arguments on Thursday, Superior Court Judge William Morse sided with the state, saying governors in Alaska hold significant authority to reduce or eliminate spending. The Assistant Attorney General said that she is pleased with the quick ruling in the state's favor, and she said the question needs to be decided before the next legislative session starts so that the legislature and the governor know the rules. Drilling efforts in the Nenana region did not strike a commercially viable natural gas find, according to Doyon Limited. Doyon Drilling, a subsidiary of Doyon, announced on Thursday afternoon that the drilling at the exploratory well of Tokatila No. 1, about 10 miles west of Nenana, did not find a commercial quantity. That site was bustling with activity back in June and July, and crews were optimistic about its chances to be viable. They gave it as much as a 50-50 chance. The Tokatila well was estimated to contain as much as 200 billion cubic feet of recoverable natural gas. It had about a 1 in 4 chance of finding about 70 million barrels of recoverable oil, too, and at the time, crews explained the commercial viability of the well would depend on numerous factors and could take months to analyze. The drilling itself was a joint effort between Doyon and Cook Inlet Region Corporation to explore so-called frontier basins in interior Alaska. It's actually the 3rd well drilled by Doyon in the region and employed about 150 people directly. The news release notes that both companies remained hopeful that the Nenana Basin will be a hit eventually. The news of the Tokatila well was contained in an announcement that Doyon will continue to invest in exploratory mapping of the region this winter. The plan is to complete 64 square miles of 3D seismic mapping in the region to supplement the 2D seismic mapping collected the last winter. Governor Walker had a letter delivered from several legislators requesting that work on the Interior Energy Project be paused in order to allow time for the well's commercial viability to be determined. Such a hold was never announced. On to the fish factor column. It was fast and furious for Alaska's premier crab fishery, with the fleet catching the nearly 8 million pound red king crab quota in Bristol Bay in less than 3 weeks. Now, the overall takedown was 15% lower from the 2015 fishery and will likely fetch record prices when all the sales are made. The final price is going to be determined between now and January, according to the executive director of the Intercooperative Exchange, which represents 70% of the Bering Sea crab harvesters. Crabbers fetched a value of $8.18 per pound for the king crab last year, with the overall value of the fishery at $81 million at the docks. The hauls since the fishery got underway on October 15th averaged 37.4 red kings per pot, compared to 32 crabs last year, and they noted that some boats were catching between 60 and 70 crab per pot, even as the fishery was coming to a close. That's about as furious as it ever comes in. Meanwhile, federal biologists conducting the annual summer surveys and calculating the catch quotas, noting that they did see high numbers of female and undersized crab, which bodes well for next year, as only the legal-sized males are allowed to be retained for sale. In a series of voicemail messages, a 52-year-old Wasilla man threatened the Planned Parenthood clinic in Anchorage, according to federal court documents. In a criminal complaint filed last week, investigators wrote that Robert Joseph Klima left 3 voice messages with that nonprofit on November 7th. During the first message, he stated that if Planned Parenthood performed an abortion for another individual, Klima would treat them just as the murderer who murdered his child. In the second message, Klima gave the clinic his telephone number, advising the organization to call him back to avoid any kind of unpleasantries. In the final message, he claimed an RPG, in other words, a rocket-propelled grenade, was pointed at the facility on Lake Otis Parkway and advised Planned Parenthood not to open their doors the following day. The FBI obtained the recordings on November 8th And a Facebook search showed law enforcement had been in a relationship with a person that Klima did not want to have an abortion. He could end up facing up to 10 years in prison plus a $250,000 fine for using a telephone to make a threat to damage and destroy a building by means of an explosive. Klima was indicted by a federal grand jury this week. With legal marijuana sales underway in Alaska, growers will soon be submitting their first tax payments to the state. For most businesses, that wouldn't be a problem. They'd just cut a check. But some banks are weary about dealing with pot businesses since marijuana remains illegal on the federal level. Carrie Kerrigan, the executive director of the Alaska Marijuana Industry Association, thinks it's going to be an all-cash business in Alaska, at least for now. The first authorized testing lab in the state for recreational marijuana opened last month, followed by the first retail cannabis shops. Now, in Alaska, growers are required to pay taxes on sales and transfers of marijuana. The state does expect to receive the first tax revenues this month. While they're giving back during the season of Thanksgiving, from elementary to high school, students at Eel River Christian School worked together to pack boxes full of goodies and hygiene products for children who are in need. It's all part of Operation Christmas Child with Samaritan's Purse, where people from across the globe put together shoebox-sized packages to be shipped to more than 100 countries. Claire O'Kay, who's a teacher at the school, said that she came up with the idea to participate in the global effort just this week, and in a few days, parents and students had donated everything they needed. She says that she wants students to think about giving back to others and be thankful for what they have. The collection of Operation Christmas Child boxes ends on November 21st. The organization's website, SamaritansPurse.org, has details on how to pack the boxes and where to drop them off. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game is recommending putting a big fish goal in place for Kenai River king salmon. In a Monday memo attached to the schedule for the Board of Fisheries' upcoming Lower Coquitlam meeting, which is set for November 30th through December 3rd in Homer, Fish and Game research biologists recommend implementing a big fish goal for both the early and late runs of kings to the escapement goals on the river. Now, under the recommendations, Fish and Game managers would have to achieve a sonar-based goal specifically for king salmon 33.3 inches or longer from mid-eye to fork. For early-run king salmon, the goal would be set at between 2,800 and 5,600, and for late-run kings, it would be set at 13,500 to 27,000. Big fish goals set a minimum number of fish that must meet a particular size requirement, not counting those that are smaller. Now, there has been some problems with the sonar, with Fish and Game counts using a sonar system that's supplemented by data from a test net. The sonar takes ultrasound images of fish passing through a particular section of the river in front of the sensor, and then the fish biologists count the fish on the image. The controversy over the accuracy of the sonar counts over the last several years caused Fish and Game to replace its older Kenai River sonar systems in 2009 with the DIDSON system, which was again replaced in 2015 because of concerns about accuracy. The current system, called the ARIS, counts salmon at river mile 14. The concerns over the years about the accuracy of sonars is because it's difficult to distinguish fish species, and sometimes river conditions get in the way. The report with the full rationale is still being prepared before the meeting in February. A Matsu cancer doctor, known for his large dinosaur and rare book collection, faces federal tax evasion charges linked to millions in charitable contributions over a 4-year period. Dr. Larry Lawson, a Big Lake resident, is one of 2 physicians at Midnight Sun Oncology, a cancer and blood disorder treatment center located at the Valley's only hospital, Matsu Regional Medical Center. Lawson's a fossil and artifact collector. He also gained notice in 2010 when he opened a short-lived dinosaur museum in a Wasilla strip mall. Lawson was indicted on Wednesday on 4 counts of tax evasion, according to the U.S. Department of Justice. He's also accused of falsely claiming anywhere between roughly $975,000 to more than $5.7 million each year between 2009 and 2012. All told, the false claims total about $11 million, according to prosecutors. The actual amount of those claims on which the federal government thinks Lawson should have paid taxes couldn't be determined as of yesterday. Lawson contributed the money to a nonprofit in Arizona and claimed he didn't get any items or property in return. But the federal indictment charges that he did, and so he should have paid taxes on at least some of those contributions. Internal Revenue Service rules and regulations say that if an individual receives items, property, or a benefit as a result of making a contribution to a qualified organization, then the individual may deduct only the amount of the contribution that exceeds the value of the benefit, items, or property received. Asked if the Arizona nonprofit also faces charges, they would only say that the investigation is ongoing. Lawson, meanwhile, is in New Zealand and couldn't immediately be reached for comment. But staffers at Midnight Sun Oncology said Thursday afternoon that the charges come as a complete shock. Damage to an icebreaker in front of the $1 million bridge on the Copper River Highway has the owner of Child's Glacier Lodge worried about the future of the bridge, as well as his business and potential adverse impact to salmon habitat critical to the local economy. There are few options available to solve the dilemma, according to Luke Borer, who built and operates the lodge on the banks of the Copper River near the bridge. He said that there's nothing to do and just to wait for the bridge to get knocked into the river and spend more than $100 million taking it out of the river or else rebuild the icebreaker. He voiced his concerns in the recent letter to Alaska Transportation Commissioner Mark Lukin, and DOT has agreed to send out bridge inspectors to assess the damage. The icebreaker in question was built to break up large icebergs coming down the Copper River from Miles Glacier to the $1 million bridge at 49.5 Mile. The damage occurred in August when a large iceberg impacted the icebreaker, protecting Pier 1 of the $1 million bridge, breaking the icebreaker into at least 3 pieces and moving it from its original position, protecting the first pier. Potential impacts of the bridge falling into the Copper River include hazards to navigation, loss of public and private lands and facilities, pollution of indraminous waters, a change of Copper River salmon monitoring methods, and subsequent impacts to the commercial Copper River salmon fishery. It would also mark the loss of a significant visitor attraction. The $1 million bridge was placed on the National Register of Historic Places in the year 2000. Bridge sections falling into the river would change the flow and bottom contour, which would also then result in a change in fish behavior, and it would impact the baseline data relied upon by Fish and Game to determine when the commercial fishermen can fish and possibly require relocating the sonar sites. As far as the paint used on the bridge, if exposed to fast-moving sediment-rich waters, that would also be sandblasted off and into the water column. And then there's the question of the impact of the bridge falling into the river on navigation for fish harvesters, including subsistence users and the tourism industry. How much time is left before the bridge might collapse? Borer said that's the $1 million question. Sana Efford, Assistant Commissioner at the State Health Department, has been named the new Deputy Commissioner of the Alaska Department of Education and Early Development. She'll start on December 1st, according to a statement on Thursday from the Education Department. Efford will serve as a top official in the department under Education Commissioner Michael Johnson. Johnson, who started as commissioner on July 1st, selected Efford for that deputy job, pending approval by the Alaska Board of Education and Early Development. She's going to replace Betty Walters, who served as the interim deputy commissioner since March. Fairbanks North Star Borough School District and the Education Support Staff Association have reached an agreement supporting the district's employees. ESSA presented the agreement to the Fairbanks School District in October for review. That new arrangement is going to incorporate benefits, including salary increases, a new health plan, and compensation for overtime work. The agreement was passed at this week's school board meeting. Yesterday marked the 10-year anniversary of the Alaska Native Health Campus being tobacco-free. It was among the first health campuses in Alaska to implement a tobacco-free policy. Unlike smoke-free, the tobacco-free campus prohibits the use of cigarettes, chewing tobacco, ICMIC, e-cigs, and vaping. In recognition of the 10-year anniversary, both the ANTHC and CSF will be hosting an event at the Anchorage Primary Native Care Center lobby on the Alaska Native Health Campus. They're also holding an event in the Benton-Tunwa Valley Native Primary Care Center lobby. Smoking cessation resources will be available, as well as native dancing and door prizes. The nation's only known population of freshwater seals will not get protections under the Endangered Species Act, according to federal officials in an announcement on Wednesday. The 250 to 300 harbor seals that live in southwest Alaska's Iliamna Lake are different from harbor seals swimming in the saltwater of Bristol Bay and the rest of the North Pacific Marine System, but they fail to meet the criteria needed to classify them as a distinct population segment. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Marine Fisheries Service rejected a 2012 petition that sought to define the lake seals as distinct and deserving the listing. That petition, which was filed by the Center for Biological Diversity, one of the most active and litigious environmental organizations in Alaska, argued that Iliamna seals are rare and unique and are at risk from several threats, including climate change and the possible development of the controversial Pebble Mine project proposed for the region. But NOAA scientists said that they concluded after studying the issue that the lake seals are indeed separate from the larger North Pacific harbor seal subspecies population, but not significant enough to qualify for protection. What might the election of Donald Trump mean for the seafood industry? Economic reports are already pointing to his platform of opposing trade and pulling out of the North America Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, a stance that goes against more than 30 years of American policy under presidents of both parties. NAFTA connects trade between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, and Trump has pledged to impose trade barriers that could reduce markets for seafood and other U.S. exports and drive up the cost of imports, causing banks then to restrict lending. This according to the New York Times. It's also a foregone conclusion that he will tank the controversial Trans-Pacific Partnership. If Trump does implement trade protectionist policies, it could tip the economy into a recession, according to global economists. Trump has also vowed to place a 45% tariff on Chinese imports and declare China a currency manipulator on his very first day in office. How this will affect the millions of pounds of Alaska seafood that are sent to China for reprocessing and then shipped back for sales in the United States, well, that's anyone's guess. The Wall Street Journal said Trump's victory could begin an era of U.S. combativeness with two of our biggest trade partners, China and Mexico, and prompt trade wars and stall international growth. The Ted Stevens International Airport is cracking down on parking violations following a reported increase in vehicles being left in traffic lanes near pickup and drop-off areas. Airport officials are saying it's become such a problem that they're calling it a, quote, serious safety hazard. The unattended cars are in direct opposition to National Transportation Security Administration guidelines, which require idling or parked vehicles to be attended at all times. Airport manager John Parrott is saying that leaving vehicles in active traffic areas presents an immediate traffic hazard, as well as a regulatory violation and potential security risk. Plus, he said it's just common courtesy. Unattended vehicles caught by patrol of airport police will now face a citation of $60. Additionally, vehicles could be towed, which would carry additional costs for impound fees. As the holidays approach, airport police say that they will be increasing their patrols. Free parking is available for up to 30 minutes for people picking up or dropping off travelers, so idling in the departure lanes isn't the only method for drivers. The U.S. Coast Guard rescue crews combined efforts to medevac an injured fisherman on November 9th from a 173-foot commercial fishing vessel some 230 miles northwest of St. Paul Island for transport to medical care in Anchorage. Coast Guard 17th District Watchstanders received a maritime medevac request on the evening of November 9th from the crew of the Blue North, advising that a 41-year-old man had suffered a neck injury while working aboard the vessel. A Coast Guard duty flight surgeon recommended the medevac, and an Air Station Kodiak MH-60 Jayhawk helicopter crew flew to the scene and hoisted the injured man to the waiting C-130 Hercules airplane crew at St. Paul, who then took him on to Anchorage. The Blue North was about 285 miles northwest of St. Paul at the time, and the crew of the Blue North was instructed to transit toward St. Paul in order to be in hoist range of the helicopter aircrew. Nancy McGuire, the longtime publisher of Alaska's oldest newspaper, said goodbye to her subscribers in an editorial published the day that she died, after she battled cancer for years. She was 72 years old. McGuire was publisher of the weekly Nome Nugget for 34 years in the western Alaska town of Nome. Her friend and former mayor of Nome, John Handelin, said that McGuire died early Thursday morning in a long-term care facility there in Nome. The Nugget was established in 1897, thriving in the rough-and-tumble gold rush town. In an editorial published in the newspaper Thursday, McGuire said goodbye, saying, quote, "I must depart soon. I will bid an affectionate farewell to all." A funeral mass is set for Saturday afternoon at St. Joseph Catholic Church in Nome. On Monday, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers informed the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe, Energy Transfer Partners, and Dakota Access LLC that it has completed the review that it launched on September 9th of this year. The Army Corps of Engineers has determined that additional discussion and analysis are warranted in light of the history of the Great Sioux Nation's dispossession of lands, the importance of that local lake to the tribe, and the government-to-government relationship, as well as the statute governing easements through government property. Army Corps of Engineers has invited the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe to engage in discussions regarding the potential conditions on an easement for the pipeline crossing that would reduce the risk of a spill or rupture, hasten detection and response to any possible spill, or otherwise enhance the protection of the local lake and the tribe's water supplies. The Army Corps of Engineers has also invited discussions of the risk of a spill in light of such conditions and whether to grant an easement for the pipeline to cross the lake at the proposed location. Right now they are continuing to welcome any input that the tribe believes is relevant to the proposed pipeline crossing or the granting of an easement. While those discussions are ongoing, construction on or under Corps land bordering the lake cannot occur because the Army Corps of Engineers has not made a final decision on whether to grant an easement. The executive director of the Alaska Democratic Party is retiring after 5.5 years. Party spokesman Jake Hamburg says Kay Brown will step down in January. The party is currently seeking application for Brown's successors through December 2nd. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, the Alaska Republican Party announced that it had hired Joshua Walton to be its executive director. Walton is a former legislative aide and campaign manager, taking over the party's day-to-day operations effective immediately. Brown is the Democratic Party's longest-serving executive director, a former state representative who's been involved in party politics since at least 2005. She said that she plans to stay involved in politics in some capacity. In the upcoming days, the Fairbanks Community Food Bank will continue gearing up for Thanksgiving. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday at Fred Meyer, Alan Mitchell with the food bank and a group of volunteers will be handing out lists of items that are needed at the food bank. Once you're done shopping, you can give the items to the volunteers, which will then be brought back to the food bank. Once the items are transferred, they'll be packaged up, and they'll be claimed this coming Wednesday by families in need. The CEO of the food bank, Ann Weaver, says that this event has turned into the biggest food drive of the year. Meanwhile, in Anchorage, with Thanksgiving just a week away, the local nonprofit Beans Cafe is hoping to gather enough food items to feed a holiday meal to those in need. The soup kitchen is serving a traditional Thanksgiving meal next Thursday and says that current donation numbers are at a low. In a statement, Beans Cafe released a list of items that are still needed for that meal. Speaking of meals, if it smells like food and looks like food, it must be food, right? Well, not in the case of ocean-faring birds that are sometimes found with bellies full of plastic. But very little research examines why birds make the mistake of eating plastic in the first place. Turns out that marine plastic debris emits the scent of a sulfurous compound that some seabirds have relied upon for thousands of years to tell them where to find food. This according to a new study from the University of California, Davis. The olfactory cue essentially tricks the birds into confusing marine plastic with food. The study was published November 9th in the journal Science Advances, and it helps explain why plastic injection is more prevalent in some seafood species than in others. Tube-nosed seabirds, such as petrels and albatross, have a keen sense of smell, which they use to hunt. They're also among the birds most severely affected by plastic consumption. The study could also open the door to new strategies that address the ocean's plastic problem, which plagues not only seabirds but also fish, sea turtles, and other marine life. To learn exactly what marine plastic debris smells like, the scientists put beads made of the three most common types of plastic debris, high-density polyethylene, low-density polyethylene, and polypropylene into the ocean at Monterey Bay and Bodega Bay off the California coast. Taking care not to add to the marine plastic problem, the scientists placed the beads inside specially sewn mesh bags and tied them to an ocean buoy before collecting them about 3 weeks later. They then brought that retrieved plastic to a somewhat unusual resource for marine ecologists, the UC Davis Robert Mondavi Institute for Wine and Food Science. Our researchers are more often found analyzing wine flavor chemistry than smelly trash. Using the food and wine chemist Susan Epler's chemical analyzer, the team confirmed that sure enough, the plastic reeked of that sulfur compound, dimethyl sulfide, or DMS, which is generally released by algae, which coats the floating plastic. They've previously determined that DMS is a scent that triggers tube-nosed seafoods to forage, and it's released when the algae is eaten by animals like krill, one of the bird's favorite meals. So while the algae doesn't smell like food itself, it does smell like food being eaten, which is the bird's version of a dinner bell. The study notes that the seabirds then track the scent of DMS to find prey are nearly 6 times more likely to eat plastic than those that do not. The study was funded by a National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship and the NSF Office of Polar Programs. Well, there are some things that Alaskans experience that people in the lower 48 may never witness, such as a brilliant aurora display or a grizzly bear. You can now add moose battle preserved in ice to that list. Even longtime Alaskans were more than surprised to see such a rare sight recently near Unalakleet. It's a western Alaska village on Norton Sound. Jeff Erickson said in a phone interview on Sunday that it's really unique for the old-timers. The elders don't know about Facebook, but they do see the cameras because, the pictures look so bad. They took the pictures in a slough near the Covenant Bible Camp. They made that discovery about a week ago. One of the friends from outside wanted to walk on ice, something they had never done before, and then they discovered the antlers frozen in the water. When they first saw it, they only saw antlers in the body and thought somebody had poached the animal. But when they took a closer look, they saw a second moose frozen in the ice. Clues into the mystery of what happened started to emerge when people carved the 2 moose out of the ice. They suspect the smaller moose either injured or killed the larger moose in the water, based on a puncture wound discovered in the head of the larger moose. They also noticed that the animals had locked antlers. Therefore, the 2 were likely stuck together after the fight, causing them both to drown. The water then froze quickly around the 2 bodies, preserving evidence of the battle. This also offers a glimpse to those from outside of what life can be like in rural Alaska. While the meat wasn't good for human consumption, it is going to be used to feed dogs and may be given to trappers for bait. There's some talk about mounting the heads as they were found and then placing them there at the Bible camp for educational purposes. Anchorage officials have agreed to suspend fines and fix up demands for the derelict Northern Lights Inn in exchange for the owner's promise to tear down the building over the next few months. In an email exchange with city officials last month, the owners of the shuttered hotel, Emerald Investments LLC, also agreed to provide fencing and additional building security to guard against squatters. Terrence Chang, a representative of Emerald Investments, said in an emailed statement that the company was always committed to demolishing the old hotel, something that they now expect to be completed by May 15th of next year, barring weather delays. Chang said that the Anchorage Fire Department received and accepted a preliminary demolition plan for the hotel earlier this month. The cream-colored boarded-up hotel on Northern Lights Boulevard shut down back in 2002 and is in a state of advanced decay. Mayor Ethan Berkowitz has called it a blight on that part of Anchorage. This fall, his administration made the building and Emerald Investments the target of a crackdown. In September, city investigators obtained a search warrant, the first of its kind in recent memory, to investigate complaints about squatters and trespassers at the hotel. Investigators found evidence that people were living there and cooking food. The city then issued violation notices and ordered the owners to repair the water, heat, and fire alarm systems by November 10th. On Thursday, they noted that the demands were suspended in exchange for a commitment to raise the building. The Alaska Marine Highway System announced on Wednesday the release of its 2017 summer schedule. If you are planning on traveling on the ferry system, the Department of Transportation and Public Facilities says that there is an increase of 1 extra day of service to 7 days a week in Lynn Canal, servicing Juneau, Haines, and Skagway. As for fees, the department is now working to balance them throughout the Marine Highway System based on distance. Similar distance routes in Prince William Sound are sometimes higher or lower than similar distance routes in southeast Alaska, and they're going to try to bring those two closer together so that no matter where you are in the system, you're going to be paying for what you get. They're going to try to do over the course of 5 years is adjust the routes and make some of those routes, of course, a little more expensive, and some are going to decrease. Meanwhile, they say reservations are available for booking online, and they recommend that Alaskans make those as early as possible. Visit Ferry Alaska online at dot.state.ak.us. And finally, University of Alaska Fairbanks students will walk the runway this weekend wearing Indigenous fashion with a contemporary twist. The Native Student Union at UAF is hosting an evening of Indigenous art, music, and fashion in downtown Fairbanks this Saturday. The event is called Indigenous and Visible. It's a benefit to raise money for the Native Student Union's mission of developing Alaska Native leaders and raising awareness about Alaska Native policy. The doors open at 6 p.m. on Saturday at the Hub on 2nd Avenue. The night will start off with Alaska Native art and appetizers, and then at 7 p.m., fashionistas wearing traditional and contemporary regalia will grace the catwalk. Afterward, there will be a DJ and live music. Tickets are $20 and can be purchased at the door. And that's our Alaska News for Friday, November 18th, 2016. I'm going to grab a cup of coffee, and I'll be back with another 5 minutes or so with a bit of commentary on one of our stories. Hope you enjoy it. Check out all of the links that I used. The entire research, every single one of these news stories is included on my website. If you go to radiofreespeech.com, check it out on today's podcast. You'll see the links that will take you directly to each and every one of these stories if you'd like to learn more about any of these particularly. Plus, you'll find also a donate and subscription button if you'd like to support what I'm doing here. And make sure you tell all your friends to check it out. Once again, it is radiofreespeech.com. I'm Steve Floyd, and we'll be back with a commentary right after this.